Iceland is a Nordic island country between the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans, on the mid-Atlantic ridge between North America and Europe. It is linked culturally and politically with Europe and is the region's most sparsely populated country. Its capital and largest city is Reykjavik, which is home to about 36% of the country's roughly 380,000 residents. The official language of the country is Icelandic. Located on a rift between tectonic plates, Iceland's geologic activity includes geysers and frequent volcanic eruptions. The interior consists of a volcanic plateau characterized by sand and lava fields, mountains, and glaciers, and many glacial rivers flow to the sea through the lowlands. Iceland is warmed by the Gulf Stream and has a temperate climate, despite a latitude just south of the Arctic Circle. Its high latitude and marine influence keep summers chilly, and most of its islands have a polar climate. According to the ancient manuscript Landnámabók, the settlement of Iceland began in 874 AD when the Norwegian chieftain Ingolfur Arnarson became the first permanent settler on the island. In the following centuries, Norwegians, and to a lesser extent other Scandinavians, immigrated to Iceland, bringing with them thralls of Gaelic origin. The island was governed as an independent commonwealth under the native parliament, the Althing, one of the world's oldest functioning legislative assemblies. Following a period of civil strife, Iceland acceded to Norwegian rule in the 13th century. In 1397, Iceland followed Norway's integration into the Kalmar Union along with the kingdoms of Denmark and Sweden, coming under de facto Danish rule following its dissolution in 1523. The Danish kingdom introduced Lutheranism by force in 1550, and Iceland was formally ceded to Denmark in 1814 by the Treaty of Kiel. Influenced by ideals of nationalism after the French Revolution, Iceland's struggle for independence took form and culminated in the Danish-Icelandic Act of Union in 1918, with the establishment of the Kingdom of Iceland, sharing through a personal union the incumbent monarch of Denmark. During the occupation of Denmark in World War II, Iceland voted overwhelmingly to become a republic in 1944, thus ending the remaining formal ties with Denmark. Although the Althing was suspended from 1799 to 1845, the island republic nevertheless holds a claim to sustaining one of the longest-running parliaments in the world. Until the 20th century, Iceland relied largely on subsistence fishing and agriculture. Industrialization of the fisheries and Marshall Plan aid following World War II brought prosperity, and Iceland became one of the wealthiest and most developed nations in the world. It became a part of the European Economic Area in 1994. This further diversified the economy into sectors such as finance, biotechnology, and manufacturing. Iceland has a market economy with relatively low taxes, compared to other OECD countries, as well as the highest trade union membership in the world. It maintains a Nordic social welfare system that provides universal health care and tertiary education for its citizens. Iceland ranks highly in international comparisons of national performance, such as quality of life, education, protection of civil liberties, government transparency, and economic freedom. Iceland has the smallest population of any NATO member and is the only one with no standing army, possessing only a lightly armed coast guard. History. Settlement and Commonwealth. According to both Landnámabók and Íslendingabók, monks known as the Papar lived in Iceland before Scandinavian settlers arrived, possibly members of a Hiberno-Scottish mission. Recent archaeological excavations have revealed the ruins of a cabin in Hafnir on the Reykjanes Peninsula. Carbon dating indicates that it was abandoned sometime between 770 and 880. In 2016, archaeologists uncovered a longhouse in Stvarfjörður that has been dated to as early as 800. Swedish Viking explorer Gerar Svabarsson was the first to circumnavigate Iceland in 870 and establish that it was an island. He stayed during the winter and built a house in Husavik. Gerar departed the following summer, but one of his men, Natfari, decided to stay behind with 2 slaves. Natfari settled in what is now known as Natfaravik, and he and his slaves became the first permanent residents of Iceland to be documented. The Norwegian Norse chieftain Ingolfur Arnarsson built his homestead in present-day Reykjavik in 874. Ingolfur was followed by many other emigrant settlers, largely Scandinavians, and their thralls, many of whom were Irish or Scottish. By 930, most arable land on the island had been claimed. The Althing, a legislative and judicial assembly, was initiated to regulate the Icelandic Commonwealth. The lack of arable land also served as an impetus to the settlement of Greenland starting in 986. The period of these early settlements coincided with the medieval warm period, when temperatures were similar to those of the early 20th century. At this time about 25% of Iceland was covered with forest, compared to 1% in the present day. Christianity was adopted by consensus around 999 to 1000, although Norse paganism persisted among segments of the population for some years afterward. The Middle Ages. The Icelandic Commonwealth lasted until the 13th century, when the political system devised by the original settlers proved unable to cope with the increasing power of Icelandic chieftains. The internal struggles and civil strife of the Age of the Stirlings led to the signing of the Old Covenant in 1262, which ended the Commonwealth and brought Iceland under the Norwegian crown. Possession of Iceland passed from the Kingdom of Norway to the Kalmar Union in 1415, when the kingdoms of Norway, Denmark, and Sweden were united. After the breakup of the Union in 1523, it remained a Norwegian dependency, as a part of Denmark, Norway. Infertile soil, volcanic eruptions, deforestation, and an unforgiving climate made for harsh life in a society where subsistence depended almost entirely on agriculture. The Black Death swept Iceland twice, first in 1402 and again in 1494. The former outbreak killed 50% to 60% of the population, and the latter 30% to 50%. Reformation and the early modern period. Around the middle of the 16th century, as part of the Protestant Reformation, King Christian III of Denmark began to impose Lutheranism on all his subjects. John Erasin, the last Catholic bishop of Haller, was beheaded in 1550 along with 2 of his sons. The country subsequently became officially Lutheran, and Lutheranism has since remained the dominant religion. In the 17th and 18th centuries, Denmark imposed harsh trade restrictions on Iceland. Natural disasters, including volcanic eruptions and disease, contributed to a decreasing population. In the summer of 1627, Barbary pirates committed the events known locally as the Turkish abductions, in which hundreds of residents were taken into slavery in North Africa and dozens killed. This was the only invasion in Icelandic history to have casualties. The 1707-08 Iceland smallpox epidemic is estimated to have killed a quarter to a third of the population. In 1783 the Laki volcano erupted, with devastating effects. In the years following the eruption, known as the mist hardships, over half of all livestock in the country died. Around a quarter of the population starved to death in the ensuing famine. Independence movement. In 1814, following the Napoleonic Wars, Denmark-Norway was broken up into 2 separate kingdoms via the Treaty of Kiel, but Iceland remained a Danish dependency. Throughout the 19th century, the country's climate continued to grow colder, resulting in mass emigration to the New World, particularly to the region of Gimli, Manitoba in Canada, which was sometimes referred to as New Iceland. About 15,000 people emigrated, out of a total population of 70,000. A national consciousness arose in the first half of the 19th century, inspired by romantic and nationalist ideas from mainland Europe. An Icelandic independence movement took shape in the 1850s under the leadership of John Sigurðsson, based on the burgeoning Icelandic nationalism inspired by the Fjölnismenn and other Danish-educated Icelandic intellectuals. In 1874, Denmark granted Iceland a constitution and limited home rule. This was expanded in 1904, and Hans Hafstein served as the first minister for Iceland in the Danish cabinet. Independence and the Kingdom of Iceland. The Danish, Icelandic Act of Union, an agreement with Denmark signed on December 1, 1918 and valid for 25 years, recognized Iceland as a fully sovereign and independent state in a personal union with Denmark. The government of Iceland established an embassy in Copenhagen and requested that Denmark carry out on its behalf certain defense and foreign affairs matters, subject to consultation with the Althing. Danish embassies around the world displayed two coats of arms and two flags, those of the Kingdom of Denmark and those of the Kingdom of Iceland. Iceland's legal position became comparable to those of countries belonging to the Commonwealth of Nations, such as Canada, whose sovereign is King Charles III. During World War II, Iceland joined Denmark in asserting neutrality. After the German occupation of Denmark on April 9, 1940, the Althing replaced the king with a regent and declared that the Icelandic government would take control of its own defense and foreign affairs. A month later, British armed forces conducted Operation Fork, the invasion and occupation of the country, violating Icelandic neutrality. In 1941, the government of Iceland, friendly to Britain, invited the then neutral United States to take over its defense so that Britain could use its troops elsewhere. Republic of Iceland. On December 31, 1943, the Danish, Icelandic Act of Union expired after 25 years. Beginning on May 20, 1944, Icelanders voted in a 4-day plebiscite on whether to terminate the personal union with Denmark, abolish the monarchy, and establish a republic. The vote was 97% to end the union, and 95% in favor of the new republican constitution. Iceland formally became a republic on June 17, 1944, with Svein Björnsson as its first president. In 1946, the U.S. Defense Force Allied left Iceland. The nation formally became a member of NATO on March 30, 1949, amid domestic controversy and riots. On May 5, 1951, a defense agreement was signed with the United States. American troops returned to Iceland as the Iceland Defense Force and remained throughout the Cold War. The U.S. withdrew the last of its forces on September 30, 2006. Iceland prospered during the Second World War. The immediate post-war period was followed by substantial economic growth, driven by the industrialization of the fishing industry and the U.S. Marshall Plan program, through which Icelanders received the most aid per capita of any European country. Vigdis Finnbogadóttir assumed Iceland's presidency on August 1, 1980, making her the first elected female head of state in the world. The 1970s were marked by the Cod Wars, several disputes with the United Kingdom over Iceland's extension of its fishing limits to 370 kilometers offshore. Iceland hosted a summit in Reykjavik in 1986 between United States President Ronald Reagan and Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev, during which they took significant steps towards nuclear disarmament. A few years later, Iceland became the first country to recognize the independence of Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania as they broke away from the USSR. Throughout the 1990s, the country expanded its international role and developed a foreign policy orientated towards humanitarian and peacekeeping causes. To that end, Iceland provided aid and expertise to various NATO-led interventions in Bosnia, Kosovo, and Iraq. Iceland joined the European Economic Area in 1994, after which the economy was greatly diversified and liberalized. International economic relations increased further after 2001 when Iceland's newly deregulated banks began to raise great amounts of external debt, contributing to a 32% increase in Iceland's gross national income between 2002 and 2007. Economic boom and crisis. In 2003 to 2007, following the privatization of the banking sector under the government of Dag Oddsson, Iceland moved towards having an economy based on international investment banking and financial services. It was quickly becoming one of the most prosperous countries in the world, but was hit hard by a major financial crisis. The crisis resulted in the greatest migration from Iceland since 1887, with a net emigration of 5,000 people in 2009. Since 2012, Iceland's economy stabilized under the government of Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir and grew by 1.6% in 2012. The center-right Independence Party was returned to power in coalition with the Progressive Party in the 2013 election. In the following years, Iceland saw a surge in tourism as the country became a popular holiday destination. In 2016, Prime Minister Sigmundur Davíð Gunnlaugsson resigned after being implicated in the Panama Papers scandal. Early elections in 2016 resulted in a right-wing coalition government of the Independence Party, the Reform Party and Bright Future. This government fell when Bright Future quit the coalition due to a scandal involving then Prime Minister Bjarni Benediktson's father's letter of support for a convicted child sex offender. Snap elections in October 2017 brought to power a new coalition consisting of the Independence Party, the Progressive Party, and the Left Green Movement, headed by Katrín Jakobsdóttir. After the 2021 parliamentary election, the new government was, just like the previous government, a tri-party coalition of the Independence Party, the Progressive Party, and the Left Green Movement, headed by Prime Minister Katrín Jakobsdóttir. In April 2024, Bjarni Benediktsson of the Independence Party succeeded Katrín Jakobsdóttir as Prime Minister. Geography. Iceland is at the juncture of the North Atlantic and Arctic Oceans. The main island is entirely south of the Arctic Circle, which passes through the small Icelandic island of Grímsey off the main island's northern coast. Iceland is closer to continental Europe than to mainland North America, although it is closest to Greenland, an island of North America. Iceland is generally included in Europe for geographical, historical, political, cultural, linguistic, and practical reasons. Geologically, the island includes parts of both continental plates. The closest bodies of land in Europe are the Faroe Islands, Jan Mayen Island, Shetland and the Outer Hebrides, both about 740 kilometers, and the Scottish mainland and Orkney, both about 750 kilometers. The nearest part of continental Europe is mainland Norway, about 970 kilometers away, while mainland North America is 2070 kilometers away, at the northern tip of Labrador. Iceland is the world's 18th largest island, and Europe's second largest island after Great Britain and before Ireland. The main island covers 101,826 square kilometers, but the entire country is 103,000 square kilometers in size, of which 63% is tundra. Geologically, Iceland is part of the Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a ridge along which the oceanic crust spreads and forms new crust. This part of the mid-ocean ridge is located above a mantle plume, causing Iceland to be subaerial above the surface of the sea. The ridge marks the boundary between the Eurasian and North American plates, and Iceland was created by rifting and accretion through volcanism along the ridge. Many fjords punctuate Iceland's 4,970 km long coastline, which is also where most settlements are situated. The island's interior, the highlands of Iceland, is a cold and uninhabitable combination of sand, mountains, and lava fields. The country is considered a strong performer in environmental protection, having been ranked 13th in Yale University's Environmental Performance Index of 2012. Politics. Iceland is a parliamentary representative democratic republic, whereby the president is the head of state, while the Prime Minister of Iceland serves as the head of government in a multi-party system. Members of the Icelandic parliament are voted in by proportional representation, by constituency. Following the 2021 parliamentary elections, the biggest parties are the center-right Independence Party, the Progressive Party and the Left Green Movement. These three parties form the ruling coalition in the cabinet led by leftist Katrín Jakobsdóttir. Other political parties with seats in the Althing are the Social Democratic Alliance, the People's Party, Iceland's Pirates, the Reform Party and the Centre Party. In 2016, Iceland was ranked second in the strength of its democratic institutions and 13th in government transparency. The country has a high level of civic participation, with 82% voter turnout during the most recent elections, compared to an OECD average of 72%. Iceland scored second in Europe for their trust in legal institutions at a mean of 73% trust as of 2018. Many political parties remain opposed to EU membership, primarily due to Icelanders' concern about losing control over their natural resources, particularly fisheries. Government. Iceland is a representative democracy and a parliamentary republic. The modern parliament, Althing, was founded in 1845 as an advisory body to the Danish monarch. It was widely seen as a re-establishment of the assembly founded in 930 in the Commonwealth period and temporarily suspended from 1799 to 1845. Consequently, it is arguably the world's oldest parliamentary democracy. It has 63 members, elected for a maximum period of 4 years. The head of government is the Prime Minister who, together with the cabinet, is responsible for executive government. The President of Iceland, in contrast, is a largely ceremonial head of state and serves as a diplomat, but may veto laws voted by the parliament and put them to a national referendum. They are elected by popular vote for a term of 4 years with no term limit. The current president is Gunni Th Johannesson. On August 1, 2016, he became the new president of Iceland, and he was re-elected with an overwhelming majority of the vote in the 2020 presidential election. The elections for the president, the Althing, and local municipal councils are all held separately every 4 years. The cabinet in the country's government is typically appointed by the president after a general election to the Althing. However, the appointment is usually negotiated by the leaders of the political parties, who decide amongst themselves which parties can form the cabinet and how to distribute its seats, as long as it has majority support in the Althing. If the party leaders are unable to come to an agreement within a reasonable period of time, the president will personally appoint the cabinet. This has not happened since the republic was founded in 1944, although in 1942 the regent, Svein Björnsson, appointed a non-parliamentary government. Svein held the practical position of a president at the time, and later became the country's first official president in 1944. The governments of Iceland have always been coalition governments, with 2 or more parties involved, as no single political party has ever received a majority of seats in the Althing throughout the Republican period. There is no legal consensus on the extent of the political power possessed by the office of the president. Several provisions of the Constitution appear to give the president some important powers, but other provisions and traditions suggest differently. In 1980, Icelanders elected Vigdis Finnbogadóttir as president, the world's first directly elected female head of state. She retired from office in 1996. In 2009, Iceland became the first country with an openly gay head of government when Jóhanna Sigurðardóttir became prime minister. Administrative divisions. Iceland is divided into regions, constituencies, and municipalities. The 8 regions are primarily used for statistical purposes. District court jurisdictions also use an older version of this division. Until 2003, the constituencies for the parliamentary elections were the same as the regions, but by an amendment to the constitution, they were changed to the 6 constituencies. The redistricting change was made to balance the weight of different districts of the country, since previously a vote cast in the sparsely populated areas around the country would count much more than a vote cast in the Reykjavik city area. The imbalance between districts has been reduced by the new system but still exists. 69 municipalities in Iceland govern local matters like schools, transport, and zoning. These are the actual second-level subdivisions of Iceland, as the constituencies have no relevance except in elections and for statistical purposes. Foreign relations. Iceland, which is a member of the UN, NATO, EFTA, Council of Europe, and OECD, maintains diplomatic and commercial relations with practically all nations, but its ties with the Nordic countries, Germany, the United States, Canada, and the other NATO nations are particularly close. Historically, due to cultural, economic, and linguistic similarities, Iceland is a Nordic country, and it participates in intergovernmental cooperation through the Nordic Council. Iceland is a member of the European Economic Area, which allows the country access to the single market of the European Union. It was not a member of the EU, but in July 2009, the Icelandic Parliament, the Althing, voted in favor of the application for EU membership and officially applied on July 17, 2009. However, in 2013, opinion polls showed that many Icelanders were now against joining the EU. Following the 2013 Icelandic parliamentary election, the 2 parties that formed the island's new government, the centrist Progressive Party and the right-wing Independence Party, announced they would hold a referendum on EU membership. In 2015, Minister for Foreign Affairs Gunnar Bragi Sveinsson informed the EU that Iceland would no longer pursue membership, but the application was not formally withdrawn and there have been subsequent calls for a referendum on the issue. Economy. In 2022, Iceland was the 8th most productive country in the world per capita, and the 13th most productive by GDP at purchasing power parity. About 85% of the total primary energy supply in Iceland is derived from domestically produced renewable energy sources. Use of abundant hydroelectric and geothermal power has made Iceland the world's largest electricity producer per capita. Historically, Iceland's economy depended heavily on fishing, which still provides 20% of export earnings and employed 7% of the workforce. The economy is now more dependent on tourism, but important sectors continue to be fish and fish products, aluminum, and ferrosilicon. Iceland's economic dependence on fishing is diminishing, from an export share of 90% in the 1960s to 20% in 2020. Until the 20th century, Iceland was a fairly poor country. Whaling in Iceland was historically significant. It is now one of the most developed countries in the world. Strong economic growth led Iceland to be ranked third in the United Nations Human Development Index report for 2021-2022. According to the Economist Intelligence Index of 2011, Iceland had the second highest quality of life in the world. Based on the Gini coefficient, Iceland also has one of the lowest rates of income inequality in the world, and when adjusted for inequality, its HDI ranking is 6th. Iceland's unemployment rate has declined consistently since the crisis, with 5% of the labor force being unemployed as of June 2012, compared to 6% in 2011 and 8% in 2010. The national currency of Iceland is the Icelandic krona. Iceland is the only country in the world to have a population under 2 million yet still have a floating exchange rate and an independent monetary policy. A poll released on March 5, 2010 by Capacent Gallup showed that 31% of respondents were in favor of adopting the euro and 69% opposed. Another Capacent Gallup poll conducted in February 2012 found that 67% of Icelanders would reject EU membership in a referendum. Iceland's economy has been diversifying into manufacturing and service industries in the last decade, including software production, biotechnology, and finance. Industry accounts for around a quarter of economic activity, while services comprise close to 70%. The tourism sector is expanding, especially in ecotourism and whale watching. On average, Iceland receives around 1.1 million visitors annually, which is more than 3 times the native population. 1.7 million people visited Iceland in 2016, 3 times more than the number that came in 2010. Iceland's agriculture industry, accounting for 5.5% of GDP, consists mainly of potatoes, green vegetables in greenhouses, mutton, and dairy products. The financial center is Borgartun, which hosts a large number of companies and 3 investment banks. Iceland's stock market, the Iceland Stock Exchange, was established in 1985. Iceland is ranked 27th in the 2012 Index of Economic Freedom, lower than in prior years but still among the freest in the world. As of 2016, it ranks 29th in the World Economic Forum's Global Competitive Index, 1 place lower than in 2015. According to the Global Innovation Index, Iceland is the 20th most innovative country in the world in 2022 and 2023. Unlike most Western European countries, Iceland has a flat tax system. The main personal income tax rate is a flat 23%, and combined with municipal taxes, the total tax rate equals no more than 36%, not including the many available deductions. The corporate tax rate is a flat 18%, one of the lowest in the world. There is also a value-added tax, whereas a net wealth tax was eliminated in 2006. Employment regulations are relatively flexible and the labor market is one of the freest in the world. Property rights are strong and Iceland is one of the few countries where they are applied to fishery management. Like other welfare states, taxpayers pay various subsidies to each other, but with spending being less than in most European countries. Despite low tax rates, agricultural assistance is the highest among OECD countries and a potential impediment to structural change. Also, healthcare and education spending have relatively poor returns by OECD measures, though improvements have been made in both areas. The OECD Economic Survey of Iceland 2008 highlighted Iceland's challenges in currency and macroeconomic policy. There was a currency crisis that started in the spring of 2008, and on October 6 trading in Iceland's banks was suspended as the government battled to save the economy. An assessment by the OECD 2011 determined that Iceland has made progress in many areas, particularly in creating a sustainable fiscal policy and restoring the health of the financial sector. However, challenges remain in making the fishing industry more efficient and sustainable, as well as in improving monetary policy to address inflation. Iceland's public debt has decreased since the economic crisis, and as of 2015 is the 31st highest in the world by proportion of national GDP. Religion. Icelanders have freedom of religion guaranteed under the constitution, although the Church of Iceland, a Lutheran body, is the state church. The Evangelical Lutheran Church shall be the state church in Iceland and, as such, it shall be supported and protected by the state. Approximately 80% of Icelanders legally affiliate with a religious denomination, a process that happens automatically at birth and from which they can choose to opt out. They also pay a church tax, which the government directs to help support their registered religion, or, in the case of no religion, the University of Iceland. The Registers Iceland keeps account of the religious affiliation of every Icelandic citizen. On March 8, 2021, Iceland formally recognized Judaism as a religion for the first time. Iceland's Jews will have the choice to register as such and direct their taxes to their own religion. Among other benefits, the recognition will also allow Jewish marriage, baby naming and funeral ceremonies to be civilly recognized. Iceland is a very secular country. As with other Nordic nations, church attendance is relatively low. The above statistics represent administrative membership of religious organizations, which does not necessarily reflect the belief demographics of the population. According to a study published in 2001, 23% of the inhabitants were either atheist or agnostic. A Gallup poll conducted in 2012 found that 57% of Icelanders considered themselves religious, 31% considered themselves non-religious, while 10% defined themselves as convinced atheists, placing Iceland among the 10 countries with the highest proportions of atheists in the world. Culture. Icelandic culture has its roots in North Germanic traditions. Icelandic literature is popular, in particular the sagas and eddas that were written during the High and Late Middle Ages. Centuries of isolation have helped to insulate the country's Nordic culture from external influence. A prominent example is the preservation of the Icelandic language, which remains the closest to Old Norse of all modern Nordic languages. In contrast to other Nordic countries, Icelanders place relatively great importance on independence and self-sufficiency. In a public opinion analysis conducted by the European Commission, over 85% of Icelanders believe independence is very important, compared to 47% of Norwegians, 49% of Danes, and an average of 53% for the EU 25. Icelanders also have a very strong work ethic, working some of the longest hours of any industrialized nation. According to a poll conducted by the OECD, 66% of Icelanders were satisfied with their lives, while 70% believed that their lives will be satisfying in the future. Similarly, 83% reported having more positive experiences in an average day than negative ones, compared to an OECD average of 72%, which makes Iceland one of the happiest countries in the OECD. A more recent 2012 survey found that around 3/4 of respondents stated they were satisfied with their lives, compared to a global average of about 53%. Icelanders are known for their strong sense of community and lack of social isolation. An OECD survey found that 98% believe they know someone they could rely on in a time of need, higher than in any other industrialized country. Similarly, only 6% reported rarely or never socializing with others. This high level of social cohesion is attributed to the small size and homogeneity of the population, as well as to a long history of harsh survival in an isolated environment, which reinforce the importance of unity and cooperation. Egalitarianism is highly valued among the people of Iceland, with income inequality being among the lowest in the world. The Constitution explicitly prohibits the enactment of noble privileges, titles, and ranks. Everyone is addressed by their first name. As in other Nordic countries, equality between the sexes is very high. Iceland is consistently ranked among the top 3 countries in the world for women to live in. Cuisine. Much of Iceland's cuisine is based on fish, lamb, and dairy products, with little to no use of herbs or spices. Due to the island's climate, fruits and vegetables are not generally a component of traditional dishes, although the use of greenhouses has made them more common in contemporary food. Formatter is a selection of traditional cuisine consisting of many dishes and is usually consumed around the month of Ori, which begins on the first Friday after January 19th. Traditional dishes also include skyr, that is a yogurt-like cheese, cured ram, singed sheep heads, and black pudding, flat kaka, dried fish, and dark rye bread traditionally baked in the ground in geothermal areas. Puffin is considered a local delicacy that is often prepared through broiling. Breakfast usually consists of pancakes, cereal, fruit, and coffee. The main meal of the day for most Icelanders is dinner, which usually involves fish or lamb as the main course. Seafood is central to most Icelandic cooking, particularly cod and haddock, but also salmon, herring, and halibut. It is often prepared in a wide variety of ways, either smoked, pickled, boiled, or dried. Lamb is by far the most common meat, and it tends to be either smoke-cured or salt-preserved. Many older dishes make use of every part of the sheep, which consists of offal minced together with blood and served in sheep's stomach. Additionally, boiled or mashed potatoes, pickled cabbage, green beans, and rye bread are prevalent side dishes. Coffee is a popular beverage in Iceland, with the country being third placed by per capita consumption worldwide in 2016, and is drunk at breakfast, after meals, and with a light snack in mid-afternoon. Coca-Cola is also widely consumed, to the extent that the country is said to have one of the highest per capita consumption rates in the world. Sport. Sport is an important part of Icelandic culture, as the population is generally quite active. The main traditional sport in Iceland is glima, a form of wrestling thought to have originated in medieval times. Popular sports include football, track and field, handball and basketball. Handball is often referred to as the national sport. The Icelandic national football team qualified for the 2016 UEFA European Football Championship for the first time. They recorded a draw against later winners Portugal in the group stage, and defeated England 2-1 in the round of 16, with goals from Ragnar Sigurðsson and Kolbeinn Sigurðsson. They then lost to hosts and later finalists France in the quarter-finals. Following up on this, Iceland made its debut at the 2018 FIFA World Cup. For both the European and the World Championships, Iceland is to date the smallest nation in terms of population to qualify. Iceland is also the smallest country to ever qualify for Eurobasket, having done so in both 2015 and 2017. However, they have not managed to win a single game in the European basketball final stages. Iceland has excellent conditions for skiing, fishing, snowboarding, ice climbing and rock climbing, although mountain climbing and hiking are preferred by the general public. Iceland is also a world-class destination for alpine ski touring and telemark skiing, with the Troll Peninsula in northern Iceland being the main center of activity. Although the country's environment is generally ill-suited for golf, there are nevertheless many golf courses throughout the island, and Iceland has a greater percentage of the population playing golf than Scotland, with over 17,000 registered golfers out of a population of approximately 300,000. Iceland hosts an annual international golf tournament known as the Arctic Open, played through the night during the summer solstice at Akureyri Golf Club. Iceland has also won the second most World's Strongest Man competitions of any country with 9 titles, including 4 by both Magnus Vermagnusson and John Paul Sigmarsson, and most recently Hafr Julius Bjornsson in 2018. Iceland is also one of the leading countries in ocean rowing. Icelandic explorer and endurance athlete Fionn Paul holds the highest number of performance-based Guinness World Records within a single athletic discipline. As of 2020, he is the first and only person to achieve the Ocean Explorers Grand Slam, performing open water crossings on each of the 5 oceans using human-powered vessels, and has claimed overall speed Guinness World Records for the fastest rowing of all 4 oceans, including Atlantic, Indian, Pacific, and the Arctic, in a human-powered rowboat. He had achieved a total of 41, including 33 performance-based Guinness World Records by 2020. Swimming is popular in Iceland. Geothermally heated outdoor pools are widespread, and swimming courses are a mandatory part of the national curriculum. Horseback riding, which was historically the most prevalent form of transportation on the island, remains a common pursuit for many Icelanders. The oldest sports association in Iceland is the Reykjavik Shooting Association, founded in 1867. Rifle shooting became very popular in the 19th century with the encouragement of politicians and nationalists who were pushing for Icelandic independence. To this day, it remains a significant pastime. Iceland has also produced many chess masters and hosted the historic World Chess Championship 1972 in Reykjavik during the height of the Cold War. As of 2008, there have been 9 Icelandic chess grandmasters, a considerable number given the small size of the population. Bridge is also popular, with Iceland participating in several international tournaments. Iceland won the World Bridge Championship in Yokohama, Japan, in 1991 and took second place with Sweden in Hamilton, Bermuda, in 1950.